You'll be paying for my wedding. It's only fair, my brother declared, his voice carrying that smug certainty he'd worn for years like a second skin. I was sitting across from him at the kitchen table, still in my work clothes, a half-finished mug of coffee cooling between my hands. Dad didn't even flinch at the ridiculousness of the demand. He nodded like it was the most natural thing in the world. Then he turned toward me, sharpness in his voice cutting through the air. And if you refuse, Liam, then don't bother coming home again. That was the line that stuck in my head. I'm Liam, 29 years old, and I've always been the one in the family who played by the rules. Studied hard, worked long hours, scraped together every cent to buy a small condo after years of saving. My parents liked to frame it differently. They said I was lucky. My brother Caleb, 2 years younger, was the golden child in their eyes. The one who always needed a little extra help, who somehow deserved my sacrifices because life had apparently been harder for him. Never mind that Caleb had racked up debts, blown through credit cards, and dropped out of school twice. He was charming in that lazy way that made people want to pick up after him. And my parents, especially Dad, enabled it at every turn. That night at the table wasn't the first time money had become the wedge between us, but it was the boldest Caleb had ever been. He didn't ask me. He declared it like it was a done deal. He leaned back in his chair, smirking as though I should feel honored to finance his big day. I remember the way Mom looked down at her plate, lips pressed together, saying nothing. Her silence was as loud as Dad's words. She rarely intervened when Dad and Caleb pushed me into a corner. Maybe she thought keeping quiet was keeping the peace. To me, it just felt like abandonment. The irony is that I had worked hard to get where I was, not just for myself, but partly for them. For years, I had contributed to the household, paid bills when Dad's hours got cut back, and even lent Caleb money I knew deep down I'd never see again. Every time, I told myself it would buy goodwill, that maybe one day they'd appreciate it. But appreciation never came, only expectation. And that night, their expectation crossed into an entitlement so heavy I could feel it pressing down on my chest. I didn't blow up. That wasn't me. I've never been the type to scream or flip tables. Instead, I sat back, fingers tightening around my mug, and just listened as Caleb rambled on about how fair it was. He claimed since I wasn't engaged, and since I already had a condo and a good job, it was only right that I covered his wedding expenses. Dad backed him up with phrases I'd heard 1,000 times. Family helps family. You're the older brother. It's your duty. We've already given you so much. That last line nearly made me choke. Given me so much. The condo I was paying off on my own. The car I bought with my own savings. The countless nights I'd gone without so they wouldn't. I sat there, a dull buzzing in my ears, thinking, is this what they actually believe? My condo had been bought in both my and Dad's names originally, partly because the bank wanted a co-signer when I was younger. I'd been steadily paying off the mortgage for years, every cent from my account. Yet, in Dad's mind, that made him partly responsible for my home, and in Caleb's mind, that meant my resources were his to use. That detail will matter later. But in the moment, I kept my mouth shut. After dinner, I went up to my old room, the room I'd barely slept in since moving out, and lay awake staring at the ceiling. Their words echoed in my head, and with every replay, my resolve hardened. I realized something that night. They would never stop taking. No matter how much I gave, it would never be enough. Caleb's wedding would be just the start. Tomorrow, it might be a house for him or bailing him out of another failed venture. And Dad would always side with him. I didn't sleep much. Instead, I started making quiet decisions in my head. I thought about the joint account Dad and I still had open, a leftover from when we managed the mortgage together. I thought about how my name was still tangled with his on the condo paperwork. And I thought about how many times I had let things slide in the past, always telling myself it was family, and I couldn't just walk away. For once, I let myself imagine what it would look like if I drew a hard line. By morning, I had made up my mind. But before I acted, I sat at the kitchen table again with Dad and Caleb. The air was awkward, heavy. Dad didn't even look up from his newspaper when I walked in, as if his ultimatum the night before was final and unquestionable. Caleb, on the other hand, was grinning, scrolling through his phone, probably looking at venues and menus he expected me to pay for. The casualness of it made my skin crawl. They had already decided my role in this family. The walking wallet, the backup plan, the reliable one they could exploit. I remember Caleb saying something like, "You'll want to book the caterers soon, Liam, before they get full. Oh, and the venue I want has a deposit of about 20 grand, so you might as well handle that first." He didn't even look up at me, Just said it in that breezy tone like I was his assistant. Dad finally folded the paper, gave me a look that was half stern, half smug, and added, "You'll do it, right? Don't make things difficult." That was the moment I knew there was no going back. Their sense of entitlement had gone beyond disrespect. It was delusion. I didn't answer them. I just picked up my keys, drove back to my condo, and spent the rest of the day making sure every financial thread that tied me to them was severed. By the time the sun went down, the joint account was closed. My paycheck was redirected solely to my personal account, and I had already contacted a lawyer to start the process of transferring the deed into my name alone. That night, lying in bed in my condo, I stared at my phone buzzing on the nightstand. Call after call, text after text, the numbers climbing higher until I saw the screen light up with 67 missed calls by morning. Each notification felt like the distant echo of a storm building on the horizon. And in that quiet, with the phone buzzing again in the dark, I couldn't help but wonder what, exactly, would they do when they realized I wasn't backing down this time. The buzzing didn't stop for days. My phone was like a living thing on the nightstand, vibrating itself across the wood until it hit the lamp. 67 missed calls became 93, then over 100. At first, I ignored them, telling myself I didn't owe them an explanation. But the longer I let it go, the angrier the voicemails became. Dad's voice was the loudest. The first message was calm, almost patronizing. "Liam, call me back. We need to talk. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." By the third message, his tone had sharpened into something I knew too well. "You're being ungrateful. After all I've done for you, this is how you repay me. Don't forget whose name is on that condo deed." That was the line that made me pause. He didn't say it as a reminder. He said it like a weapon, like leverage. He thought he had me trapped, like always. Caleb's messages were different. They were casual, entitled, dripping with arrogance. "Bro, what's the big deal? It's just money. You're not even married. You don't even need it. Stop being selfish." Then later, "If you don't help me out, people are going to start asking questions. You really want to look like the cheap older brother who abandoned his family." He said it like my reputation was his to control. I tried to keep my head down that week, going to work, coming home, staying quiet, but the pressure didn't stay on the phone. It bled into every corner of my life. Mom texted me once, not to ask how I was doing, not to check if I was okay, but to plead on Caleb's behalf. "Please don't make this harder on your brother. You know he's not good with money. You've always been the responsible one." It stung more than Dad shouting. She wasn't siding with me. She was just smoothing the path for Caleb, like always. By Friday, Dad showed up at my condo. I didn't answer the door. I watched him through the peephole, his figure pacing back and forth in the hallway, fist banging against the door until the neighbors peeked out. He shouted my name, said things like, "You're still my son, but you're acting like a stranger. And if you shut us out, don't expect us to be there when you need family." The irony was almost unbearable. When had they ever been there for me? That weekend, I made the mistake of visiting my parents' house. I told myself it would be quick. I just wanted to grab a few old things I had stored in the garage. The moment I pulled up, Caleb was already outside, leaning against his car like he'd been waiting for me. He didn't even let me out of mine before he started in. "You're making a fool out of yourself?" he sneered. "Do you know what people are saying? That you're bitter, jealous, that you can't stand me being happy." He smirked like he thought it cut me deep. But the thing is, I didn't envy his happiness. I envied the blind support he got, no matter how reckless he was. Inside the house, Dad was sitting in his usual spot, recliner tilted back, TV droning in the background. He muted it when I walked in. "We need to settle this, Liam," he said, his voice clipped. "You've always had more than your brother. It's only right you share. That condo. You wouldn't even have it if it weren't for me. You don't get to just shut us out." I remember standing there holding a box of my old belongings and feeling like a stranger in my own home. The walls I'd grown up in felt hostile, like they were closing in. Every word they threw at me wasn't about family. It was about what they thought I owed them. Caleb chimed in, his voice dripping with mockery. "If you're really so independent, why are you acting scared? Just pay for the wedding. Be the good brother for once." He said it with that smirk I hated, the one that told me he thought he'd already won. I left without saying much, but inside, something shifted. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was clarity. They weren't going to stop. The favoritism, the guilt trips, the manipulation, it was all a cycle. And I had been stuck in it for years. Walking away that night, I realized I had finally broken free of the illusion that things could ever be different. But as much as I wanted to stay quiet and let them rant into the void, I knew it wouldn't end there. Caleb and Dad weren't just going to let me go. And the longer I stayed silent, the more they would twist the story, paint me as the villain. The real storm was still building, and I could feel it closing in, one missed call at a time. It happened the following week when I thought things couldn't possibly get worse. I had just finished a long shift at work, the kind where your eyes sting from staring at screens and your shoulders ache from hours hunched over. All I wanted was to get home, heat up leftovers, and finally breathe in peace. But when I walked up to my condo building, I noticed something strange. The front desk attendant, who usually just nodded politely, gave me a weary look. She hesitated before saying, "Your dad was here earlier, said he was checking on the place for you. I thought you knew." My stomach dropped. I didn't give him a key. Not since I moved in. But years ago, back when we signed the mortgage papers together, he'd kept a spare. I hadn't thought much about it then, telling myself he'd never use it without asking. But that night, as I unlocked the door to my unit, I felt a chill run down my spine. The lights were on. The living room smelled faintly of his aftershave. And worse, there were papers spread across my coffee table, bank statements, my mortgage documents, even my pay stubs from the last few months. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. How did he get these? I had locked everything in my filing cabinet. That's when I noticed the cabinet drawer still ajar, the lock crudely forced open. My father had gone through my private files, pulled them apart, and laid them out like evidence. On top was a handwritten note in his familiar scrawl, "We'll discuss this. Don't make things harder than they need to be." It felt like a violation I couldn't put into words. This wasn't just about money anymore. He had broken into my home, crossed every boundary I had tried to set, and treated my life like it was his property to manage. I called him immediately, my hands shaking. "What were you doing in my condo?" I demanded. He didn't even sound guilty. His tone was calm, almost smug. "I told you, Liam, we're family. That place wouldn't exist without me. You don't get to slam doors in our faces and act like you're above us. If you won't contribute willingly, maybe it's time I reminded you what you owe." "What I owe?" I snapped. "I've paid every cent of that mortgage. Every cent. You've never made a payment since the first year." There was a pause. Then his voice hardened. "The deed still has my name. Don't forget that. If you won't help your brother, I'll make sure that condo isn't yours to keep." I remember standing in my living room, surrounded by the chaos he left behind, my chest so tight I could barely breathe. It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. He was willing to use my home, the one thing I had built for myself, as leverage to force me back into line. And if that wasn't enough, Caleb piled on the betrayal. 2 days later, I got a notification from the bank about a suspicious attempt to withdraw from the now-closed joint account. When I called, the banker explained that someone had come in with my father, trying to argue that the account closure was invalid. They had demanded access to funds that weren't even there anymore. The banker told me in a careful tone that Caleb had been the one insisting his brother owed him for the wedding. I sat there on the phone, listening in disbelief as the banker described how far they had gone. They hadn't just asked me for help anymore. They had actively tried to pry open accounts that weren't theirs. Accounts I had worked my whole adult life to protect. That night, as I sat in my condo with my files scattered around me, I felt something inside me break. Not sadness, not even anger in the way I used to feel it, but something colder, sharper. This wasn't a family misunderstanding anymore. It was theft waiting to happen. It was a betrayal so deep I couldn't see them the same way again. I poured myself a glass of water and stared at the stack of documents. My father's note was still there on top, taunting me with its smugness. And for the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't just the older brother trying to keep the peace. I wasn't just the son carrying the weight so no one else had to. I was the target they thought they could keep bleeding dry forever. And that night, staring at that note, I made myself a quiet promise. Never again. I didn't sleep much after finding my father's note. I lay in bed with the glow of the streetlight cutting lines across the ceiling, replaying every word he'd said. The violation of walking into my condo, tearing through my files, leaving that smug little messageit clung to me like a weight I couldn't shake. For years, I had tolerated their manipulation, convincing myself it was just family being difficult. But this was different. This was my sanctuary, my home, the one place I thought was mine alone. And they had barged right in, as if I had no right to privacy, no right to independence. The next week was a blur of silence and paranoia. Every time the elevator doors opened on my floor, my chest tightened. Every knock on a neighbor's door made me wonder if it was them again, coming back to take something else. At work, I couldn't concentrate. I'd stare at spreadsheets until the numbers blurred, my phone buzzing on my desk with more missed calls and voicemails stacking up. By then, the tone of those messages had shifted again. Dad's voice had gone from angry to almost mocking. "You're acting like a child, Liam. Locking us out won't change anything. We'll always be your family. That deed has my name, too. You can't erase me." Caleb's messages were crueler. "If you keep this up, don't expect an invite to the wedding. Everyone's going to know you abandoned us. Good luck explaining that to your future kids when they ask why Uncle Caleb doesn't talk to you." He said it like he was punishing me with silence, as if his absence was the worst thing that could happen. But the truth was, their words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I'd always told myself I didn't need their approval, that I could build a life on my own terms. Yet here I was, sitting in my condo, surrounded by papers and half-eaten takeout, feeling like a boy again, cornered, unwanted, disposable. The realization hit me hardest late one night when I caught myself staring at my phone, almost hoping for a text that said something different, an apology, a sign of love, anything. But it never came. The lowest point came on a Saturday morning. I had decided to visit my mother alone, without the others around, hoping she might listen. Maybe she'd understand. Maybe she'd finally see the damage Dad and Caleb were doing. But when I arrived, she wouldn't even meet my eyes. She kept busying herself in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup she didn't need to stir, while I tried to explain. "Mom, he broke into my condo. He went through my files. Caleb tried to access my account. Don't you see how wrong this is?" Her shoulders hunched, but she never turned around. Finally, she sighed, her voice quiet but firm. "Liam, they just want what's best. Your brother needs you right now. You've always been stronger than him. Isn't it your role to carry more?" That was it. That was her answer. Not outrage, not defense, just another version of the same old excuse. My throat tightened, and for a second, I couldn't breathe. Even she had chosen to see me not as a son, but as a resource, a safety net. And in that moment, something inside me cracked. I left her house without saying goodbye, driving back in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight it hurt. By the time I got to my condo, I didn't even turn on the lights. I just sat in the dark, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, thinking about how I had become a stranger in my own family. That was rock bottom. The realization that no matter what I gave, no matter how much I bent or broke myself to fit their demands, I would never be seen as anything but the provider, the one who fixes, the one who pays, the one they can guilt into giving more. And yet, as low as it felt, a strange clarity began to seep in. For the first time, I allowed myself to think about life without them, not just surviving their storms, but walking away from them completely. What if I stopped answering calls? What if I cut ties entirely? What if I finally took back every part of my life they thought they controlled? It wasn't a plan yet, not fully, just the seed of one. A quiet voice whispering that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't powerless after all. I sat there in the dark, clutching my father's note in one hand, and I felt something shift. They had pushed me to rock bottom. Yes, but in that depth, I saw the first outlines of a way out. And though they didn't know it yet, their betrayal had just lit the fuse. The weeks after hitting that low point felt like moving through fog at first. Every call I ignored, every message I deleted, it all left me hollow but strangely lighter. The silence that followed was deafening. But for the first time in years, it was my silence, mine to control. I started small, focusing on routines that made me feel steady. Early mornings at the gym, evenings cooking for myself instead of grabbing takeout, and long walks through the city with my phone left deliberately at home. Each step was a reminder that I didn't need them to define me. Work became my anchor. I threw myself into projects that had once felt draining, but now gave me a sense of purpose beyond my family's chaos. My boss noticed. Within a month, I was offered a leadership role on a major account, something I'd been passed over for before, likely because I'd been too distracted by family obligations. This time, I had the bandwidth, the focus, and the drive. I accepted, and with it came a raise significant enough to ease the financial anxiety that had haunted me since Dad's threats about the condo. With that raise, I did something symbolic. I hired a lawyer, not just to finalize the deed transfer, but to comb through every old tie I still had with my family. The joint account was already closed, but the lawyer uncovered other little strings I hadn't thought about. Insurance policies, emergency contacts, even old authorizations where Dad's name lingered like a shadow. One by one, I cut them all. Each signature, each notarized document felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Outside of work, My social life began to shift, too. Friends I had drifted from, always too busy running home to put out another fire, started reappearing. I met them for dinners, laughed in ways I hadn't laughed in years, and felt something I had almost forgotten, belonging. One night, a friend looked at me and said, "You seem lighter, like you're finally breathing again." And for the first time, I admitted it out loud. I cut them off. I began to see my family dynamic with fresh eyes. Where I had once seen obligation, I now saw manipulation. Where I once saw sacrifice, I now saw exploitation. It was like a veil had been lifted. Every time I thought about Dad waving that deed over my head, or Caleb sneering about me paying for his wedding, it no longer crushed me. It fueled me. And the more I built my independence, the stronger I felt. The condo was officially mine alone now. No trace of Dad's name. The locks were changed, new security installed. That space became more than just a home. It was proof that I could carve out a life no one else had a claim on. Even small victories felt monumental. I remember one Saturday morning waking up to sunlight streaming through the blinds, making coffee in my kitchen, and realizing I wasn't bracing for the next demand, the next guilt trip, the next intrusion. The quiet was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. For the first time, I looked around and thought, this is mine. All of it. Meanwhile, the calls didn't stop, but they changed. Where once there had been anger, now there was desperation. Dad's voice grew thin in the voicemails. "We can work this out, Liam. You're blowing this out of proportion. Don't do this to your brother." Caleb's tone shifted from smug to pleading. "I already told people you're paying. How's it going to look if you back out now? Just don't embarrass me like this." That was when I realized something critical. I had power. For years, they had held it over me, but only because I had allowed it. Now, every ignored call, every silence tilted the balance back in my favor. They needed me. I didn't need them. And as my career flourished, my finances stabilized, and my confidence grew, the thought that had begun in the dark that night, what if I truly walked away, evolved into something sharper, clearer. What if I didn't just walk away? What if I made sure they finally understood the cost of trying to use me? I didn't act yet. Not then. But quietly, piece by piece, I began preparing. I started documenting everything. Every message, every voicemail, every attempt to access my accounts. I spoke with my lawyer about legal protections, about ensuring there was no way Dad or Caleb could twist things in their favor. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't over. They weren't going to let me go without a fight. But this time, I wasn't the one trapped in their cycle. This time, I was the one holding the leverage. And as that realization sank in, I felt the first true spark of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in months. Not fear, not guilt, but anticipation. The shift from survival to strategy was subtle at first. For months, I had been reacting, dodging calls, shutting doors, untangling my finances from theirs. But now, with the condo deed firmly in my name and my career moving forward, I started to think less about what they had done to me and more about how I might use their own behavior against them. It began when my lawyer called with an update. "Liam, your father tried to contest the deed transfer." My stomach tightened, but the lawyer chuckled. "Don't worry, he has no standing. You've made every payment on this place, and the documents prove it. He's got nothing. If anything, his attempt only makes him look worse." That was when I realized something important. My father wasn't careful. He relied on intimidation and bluster, not facts. And Caleb, for all his arrogance, wasn't clever either. They had always gotten their way because no one pushed back. But in the world of contracts, paper trails, and legal protections, their bark was louder than their bite. So, I leaned into that. I started saving every voicemail, every text, every failed attempt to breach my accounts. My lawyer suggested something that made me pause. If they keep pushing, you could pursue a restraining order. At the very least, you could send a cease and desist. They've already crossed the line once. The idea of putting something official on record stirred something in me. For so long, they had wielded the power of family as a shield, making me feel guilty for even thinking about protecting myself. But on paper, in front of the law, they were just men harassing another man. At work, meanwhile, I was climbing higher. The leadership role I'd taken snowballed into more responsibility. I was invited to client dinners, to strategy meetings, to places where my voice was not only heard but valued. And with that came connections, lawyers, financial advisors, even a couple of real estate professionals who specialized in investment properties. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was learning, absorbing, and slowly, piece by piece, building a network that was entirely mine. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very independence my father mocked, the responsibility my mother exploited, the financial success Caleb sneered at Tit was becoming my shield. Where once they saw it as proof that I could afford to carry them, I now saw it as proof I didn't need them at all. And then came the moment that crystallized everything. A friend of mine, one of the same friends I'd reconnected with after years of absence, invited me to his engagement party. I almost didn't go, thinking it would be too painful, a reminder of Caleb's looming wedding drama. But that night, surrounded by people who actually celebrated one another, who laughed without malice, I realized something. I had been treating family like an unbreakable bond, when in reality, it was a choice. That night, another idea took root. If Caleb wanted me to pay for his wedding so badly, what if I turned that expectation on its head? Not by giving in, but by exposing just how far he'd gone to manipulate me. I had enough evidence now to ruin the story he was trying to spin about this selfish older brother. If he wanted the world to believe I was responsible for his happiness, then the truth about his entitlement would hit him harder than any check ever could. I didn't act immediately. Instead, I waited, gathered, and watched. Every time Caleb sent a new message, every time Dad left a bitter voicemail, I added it to the growing pile of evidence. My lawyer assured me that if they ever tried something drastic, I was more than prepared. And quietly, I began to sketch out the contours of a plan, not just to protect myself, but to make sure they finally understood what it felt like to lose control. Because for years, they had treated me like a resource. But now, I had become something they didn't expect, a liability to their reputation, their plans, and their fragile egos. And the day was coming soon when I'd stop waiting, stop preparing, and finally show them exactly how much power I had gained. The first real strike wasn't loud. It wasn't a confrontation or a shouting match. It was quiet, deliberate, and entirely legal. My lawyer drafted a cease and desist letter addressed to both my father and Caleb, citing harassment, attempted financial interference, and unlawful entry into my condo. It was written in sharp, formal language, the kind that strips away all the emotional noise and leaves only facts. I signed it without hesitation. Copies were sent by certified mail. I knew the moment they received them because my phone lit up with furious messages within the hour. Dad's voice thundered on voicemail. "How dare you bring lawyers into this? We're family, Liam. Family doesn't threaten each other with legal papers." Caleb, on the other hand, sent a stream of texts, his tone alternating between mockery and panic. "What is this supposed to be? You think you're better than us now? You think anyone's going to believe your little sob story? You're pathetic." Then, a few hours later, "Delete it. Please don't ruin this for me. You don't understand what people will think." That last line told me everything I needed to know. They weren't worried about losing me. They were worried about losing the illusion. The carefully crafted story where Caleb was the golden child, Dad was the strong patriarch, and I was the reliable workhorse who always showed up when needed. My silence had already cracked that illusion. But this was a hammer blow. The real revenge, though, came a week later when Caleb's fiancé's family reached out to me. I hadn't expected it. They had heard whispers that I was refusing to help out. And apparently, Caleb had painted me as selfish, bitter, and jealous. His fiancé's father, a man I had met once or twice at gatherings, called me directly. His voice was calm, almost curious. "Liam, I just want to understand. Caleb said you refused to pay for the wedding and that you've been causing problems. Is that true?" I paused. Then with a steady voice I didn't know I had, I said, "I'm not paying for Caleb's wedding because I have no obligation to. He and my father have been harassing me, breaking into my condo, and even trying to access my accounts. I have the evidence if you'd like to see it." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, the man sighed. "That's not what we were told." His tone had shifted, less skeptical, more weary. "If you wouldn't mind, send me what you have." So I did. I forwarded copies of the messages, the attempted bank withdrawal report, even a photo of the note my father left after breaking into my place. I didn't embellish. I didn't dramatize. I just let the truth sit in their inbox. Undeniable and damning. 2 days later, I heard through a mutual friend that Caleb's fiancé's parents had confronted him. They had demanded an explanation, furious that he had lied and tried to drag me into his mess. Apparently, the wedding planning hit a wall right then and there. Deposits went unpaid. Vendors started backing out, and the once smug grin on Caleb's face disappeared. Meanwhile, Dad showed up at my condo again, banging on the door until security escorted him out. He shouted through the hallway loud enough for neighbors to hear that I was destroying the family. But this time, it wasn't just me who saw it. Other people witnessed his rage, the red-faced entitlement that had ruled my life for years. The mask was slipping in public now, not just behind closed doors. The best part, though, was the ripple effect. Friends and extended relatives who had always believed Caleb's story started calling me, asking what was really going on. I didn't rant. I didn't insult. I simply explained what had happened calmly and factually. And with each conversation, I could feel the tide turning. The golden child narrative was crumbling, replaced by something raw, truer. For the first time, Caleb and my father weren't in control of the story. I was. And as much as they raged, as much as they tried to claw back the narrative, the truth had already spread too far. Their own actions had given me all the ammunition I needed, and I hadn't even raised my voice. I had always thought revenge would feel explosive, like fire. But in reality, it was cold, quiet, and precise. And the satisfaction didn't come from watching them suffer. It came from finally knowing I wasn't powerless anymore. The real question now was how far I was willing to take it. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one on the defensive. I was the one holding the matchbook, staring at the bridges they thought I'd never dare to burn. The fallout came faster than even I expected. Caleb's fiancée called off the engagement within a month. It wasn't just the lies, though those were bad enough. It was the realization that if he could manipulate his own brother this way, what would he do in a marriage? Word spread quickly through her family, and soon Caleb's reputation, once carefully curated as the charming younger brother, was in tatters. Invitations stopped coming. His job, already shaky, slipped through his fingers after too many missed days, and the smug confidence he'd once worn like armor evaporated. My father didn't fare much better. The cease and desist letter, combined with his public meltdown in my condo hallway, left him humiliated in front of neighbors and extended relatives alike. For years, he had been the figure of authority, the one everyone deferred to at family gatherings. But now, whispers followed him. Did you hear what he did? Breaking into Liam's place, threatening his own son. The respect he thrived on crumbled, leaving him bitter and isolated. Even Mom, who had always stood in his shadow, began to quietly distance herself from his rages. I don't know if it was shame or exhaustion, but for the first time, she stopped defending him. And me? I thrived. My promotion at work solidified into a permanent leadership role, and with it came financial stability I'd never dreamed of before. Friends I had once neglected became my chosen family, people who celebrated my successes instead of resenting them. I even started dating again, cautiously, realizing I had more to offer when I wasn't weighed down by guilt and obligation. The final confrontation came one late afternoon when Dad showed up at my condo for what would be the last time. He wasn't shouting this time. His voice was worn down. "Liam, you've ruined us," he rasped. "You've torn this family apart. Was it worth it?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see the man who had towered over me all my life. I saw someone small, desperate, clinging to power he no longer had. I kept my voice steady. "I didn't ruin this family. You did. You and Caleb. All I did was stop letting you use me." He flinched as if the words physically struck him, but I didn't waver. I stepped back inside, closed the door, and this time I didn't feel guilt pressing at my chest. I felt peace. Weeks later, I hosted a small dinner in my condo. Friends filled the space with laughter, the kind of laughter that doesn't carry judgment or demand repayment. As I raised a glass, I thought about everything it had taken to get here. The manipulation, the betrayal, the rock bottom I had clawed my way out of. And I realized the most powerful revenge wasn't the cease and desist letter or the ruined wedding. It was this: building a life so full and steady that their absence didn't leave a hole. Caleb and Dad had lost their grip on me, and in the process, they had lost everything they thought they controlled. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't begged. I had simply walked away. And when I did, their entire world collapsed behind me. I smiled as I clinked glasses with my friends and said the words I wished I had believed years ago. Family isn't who you're born to. It's who stands beside you. And for the first time in my life, I meant it.